As a YouTuber, I'm delighted every now and then when a company comes out with a banger camera that ups the ante. Now, I remember 7 years ago when DJI came out with the Inspire 2. They did a promo short film with Ryan Felipe showcasing the drone being used as an A camera.
Okay, that looks
well,
good.
Here we are with the Inspire 3, and it now outperforms all my A cameras in dynamic range, frame rates, resolution, and color fidelity. So now what do? A, parade this past all my inferior cameras, shaming them in hopes of better performance in the future. B, make this my new vlog setup. Or C, do we take this up to Canada for Gerald Undone to test this? He's never tested a drone before. He thinks he's getting a cinema camera, which he is, just one that flies. Guys, this wouldn't be an official Gerald Undone dynamic range test without... Gerald isn't the only one who likes Storyblocks. Storyblocks has over 1 million royalty-free digital assets, not just 4K and HD clips, but music, sound effects, drag and drop templates, and more. Best of all, it's not a pay-per-clip plan, it's unlimited download and quite a growing library of assets that are current with today's video trends, and all of this is with clear-cut, hassle-free license included. You need a pre-made template? Storyblocks. Just like Gerald on this episode, Storyblocks did all the hard work for me. So check this out, they even have a plugin for Premiere Pro, so now you don't even have to go to the website and download, you can search inside the timeline. Premiere Pro timeline, Storyblocks. Join us, Storyblokes. Go to storyblocks.com/makeartnow. So basically, I just want to know what's the best setting on here for dynamic range and how does it stack up?
Okay, so we tested the dynamic range in a bunch of different situations on the Inspire 3, and we've got some conclusions to make here. So first off, if we just talk about the most pure form, I guess, which is the 8K recording on an 8K timeline with noise reduction in the camera turned all the way down, they have a slider for it, and no oversampling, no nothing, just like what's the base that we can get here. And this is in D-Log, and it's with the base ISO of 800. And for that, you can see, if we look over here at slope-based DR, we get 14.9, which makes me think this is rated at 15 stops of dynamic range. It's the total amount of stops that we can see. But then if we look at the 0.5 medium score here, this gives us how many clean usable stops there are, which is a signal-to-noise ratio of 2, and we can see we get 11.6. Now again, this is gonna test kind of lower than what you can expect because this is 8K, non-oversampled, noise reduction turned down, etc. And then we also wanted to test the second native ISO to see how effective it is at managing that. And at ISO 4000, with everything else remaining the same, we still got 14.9 total stops and 11.4, which is slightly worse, but it's within the margin of error. So I would say that the second native ISO is true and is great. You get pretty equal performance at both 800 and 4000. Now we also tested Super 35, which doesn't have the same oversampling as 8K down to 4K, but it is still slightly oversampled from 5.5K. And again, we're getting 14.7 stops and 11.5, so just slightly worse than the 8K on 8K. And then Super 35 at ISO 4000, again, it's only slightly worse than its first native ISO, so it gets good results. Now I wanted to try to put a little noise reduction on, but I thought I would use the noise reduction in the camera, so rather than put the slider all the way down to -2, I just left it at its default of 0. And so if you shoot 8K, put it on an 8K timeline, so still not oversampled, but you just shoot with default noise reduction, you still get your 15 stops, but your signal noise ratio of 2 medium here goes up to 12.3, which is a 2/3 of a stop increase over noise reduction at -2, which is, this is now a really, really good score, 15 stops of 12.5 clean, and it's also more fair compared to some mirrorless cameras where you can't turn off the noise reduction. But if we take it one step further and we try to compare it to, say, a Sony mirrorless camera that has the noise reduction turned on and automatically oversamples as well, we did one of those here. We shot in 4K, oversampled from the 8K, and we shot in H.264. When you shoot in these H.264 codecs, they tend to be slightly better for noise performance than in the ProRes. And you can see that of the 14.9 stops, we now have a clean 13.3, which is great. I mean, that's gotta be one of the best. I think that beats all the mirrorless cameras, and we're into the high-end cinema camera territory now. So if you shoot it like a Sony camera, let's say, it actually outperforms the Sony cameras, which is saying a lot. And then just for good measure, we also changed it to 4K 60 because anytime you're above 30 frames per second in full frame mode, the base ISOs change, the native ISOs change. They change from 800 and 4000 to 320 and 1600. So we wanted to see how that affected the dynamic range. And sure enough, at 4K 60 with ISO 320, what we noticed is that the total amount of dynamic range that you can detect went from 15 stops down to 14, which is interesting. You lose a stop total, but the stops are now cleaner, probably because we're shooting at a lower ISO. So instead of the 11.6, 11.7, it's a 12.5 on the medium with a signal noise ratio of 2. And if we use the second ISO, so here we have 4K 60 ISO 1600, we have 13.8 with a 12.7. So again, in pretty much every mode, the second native ISO is very similar to the first native ISO, just sort of different groupings here. You get worse total dynamic range when you shoot at high frame rate, but you get cleaner stops in the medium zone there. And then finally, we did a ProRes RAW clip. With testing ProRes RAW, obviously you have to shoot it, then you have to convert it to something else and then run it through the testing. So there's gonna be slight variances, but again, we did still see the 15 stops, and we actually had slightly better noise performance than just the regular 8K. The 8K ProRes RAW it got a medium score of 12 instead of the 11.6 for the 8K ProRes. You know, do with that what you want. It's always hard to figure that out. Is it because of the conversion process? Is it because we converted it from ProRes RAW to 4444XQ? Like, who knows? All I can say is that the ProRes RAW seems perfectly usable in terms of the dynamic range. You're not giving anything up. The noise isn't outrageous. It's not unusable. It doesn't require a crazy amount of post-processing. So the takeaway here, I would say, is that if you have the post-processing power, then shoot 8K, and then do it all yourself in post. You take your 8K clip, put it on a 4K timeline. You're gonna get a better result. You can apply your own noise reduction. You're gonna get a better result. And you're gonna have up to 15 stops that you can clean up there. But if you just wanna do it all in camera, you can shoot 4K, oversample from 8K, put on a little bit of noise reduction, just leave it at its default of 0, or even go up a little bit more if you want, and you're gonna get a really, really, really good score right out of camera. And if you're curious, by the way, of how this compared to the Inspire 2, we did a test with the Inspire 2 in D-Log at ISO 400, which was its native, in H.265, and the Inspire 2 could see a total of 14.2 stops, and it got a really clean medium score of 13.7, so that was impressive, but the new drone can actually see a full stop more, so there's a greater ceiling on the new drone, 14 versus 15, it would seem. Sorry, are we going?
Yeah, keep going, don't stop on my account, you're doing great. The fact that this is performing as good, if not better than your A1,
Yeah.
and it's the same size sensor.
I haven't tested every element, but we're talking dynamic range. It's like a slightly better A1 that flies.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
Actually, you think it's the same sensor?
There's always similarities that make you think it is, and there's slight differences that make you can't see.
Is this a flying A1?